All right, we are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Our guest this morning is a malpractice attorney here in Middle Tennessee, Clint Kelly. Terrific. Every time he comes on, I learn something. It's just the way it is. You've been coming on for a long time, my friend.
I have. Great thing about this business, always something new to talk about.
That's exactly the great thing about both of our business.
Yeah.
Listen, we've got another caller waiting through the break. We'll go to Jesse. Jesse, good morning. Hi, Jesse.
Hello.
Hello, Jesse. How can we help you?
Yes, my problem was kind of a problem. A couple of years ago, I had a hematose.
Yeah?
And I went and had surgery on it. And when they wrapped it up and everything, when I came home, well...
Are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, top of my foot, when they wrapped it up, my foot got feeling funny.
Okay.
And I told my daughter, I said, my foot is feeling funny. I said, look, see what's going on. So she unwrapped it. And the top of it, where my feet bend, it started turning raw.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't understand why. And so I called the doctor, and they told me to come back in a couple of days. And he says, well, the shoe strap was probably too tight on it. I said, it couldn't be that because when I got home, I got in bed and hadn't got my feet anymore.
Yep.
So did you have any long-term problems with it, or did they fix it?
No, it's been 2 years ago, and they didn't do anything about it. He just said it was a fault of the strap.
And how's your foot now?
Oh, it still aches.
Yeah.
It is. It's not raw, but it aches all the time, 24 hours.
Okay. I don't know. First of all, you know, if nothing else, we can comment on the fact this was 2 years ago, and even if he had a case,
Right.
statute of limitations is expired.
Right. A couple things. First of all, this would be deemed whether it's a post-op or post-procedure issue, which are dressings that are too tight. They're supposed to check the dressings from time to time, because if dressings are too tight, then you can get a lack of circulation in the area that's dressed, and that can lead to what we call necrosis, which is just a medical word for dying tissue, and that's where tissue becomes raw and can lead to infection, can cause some serious problems, ultimately lead to, perhaps in worst case scenario, loss of the limb. The statute of limitations in Tennessee is very, very important for everyone to remember. You've got 1 year, that's 1 year, from the date that you learn you've been injured by a doctor or hospital to give what's called pre-suit notice. If you do not do that within the period of a year, your claim is barred forever. And as you and I have discussed before, there have been cases that I've had to turn down, meritorious cases where it might have been worth $1 million or $2 million, but unfortunately the patient didn't know that they were supposed to send pre-suit notice within a year, and the claim was barred. And there are also situations, Dick, where the doctor has basically talked the patient into letting the 12 months go by. You know, the doctor will cause an injury, and then the doctor will tell the patient, let's give it another 6 months, or let's give it another 10 months to see how it heals. And by the time the years run out and the injury hasn't healed, the doctor's like, well, I'm sorry, nothing I can do about it. I'm going to send you to someone else or discharge you. And the patient's like, well, okay, I guess I'll go see a lawyer. And the lawyer says, you waited too late.
And that happens.
Yeah.
They know, they've got an eye on the calendar.
They do.
Okay. Listen, I'm wondering too, though, attorneys in your field, you've told me on more than one occasion that the tort law makes it more difficult than ever before to sue anyway. But we see time and again right now, the healthcare community, nurses, doctors, fewer of them, a lot of the nurses leaving the business, doctors, a lot of the stress, the hours. I'm not making excuses for them, but the reality is this. And so I would think we're seeing more malpractice or negligence cases popping up simply because mistakes are being made because there aren't enough on the job. True or not true?
Well, actually, that's untrue, Nick, from the standpoint that there are more mistakes. There's no question about that, because I get calls all the time, and the call volume has gone up substantially over the last really 10 years. COVID caused a little bit of a lull because we couldn't look at COVID cases because of the COVID immunity bill. For everybody who doesn't know, if the injury is related to treatment for COVID, you've got no lawsuit. The legislature took your rights away to sue over that. But the actual number of malpractice lawsuits has either remained steady or declined in relationship to the growth of the population over the last 10 years. Reason why? First, the law makes it much more difficult to file these lawsuits.
Yep.
And number two, because doctors and hospitals win 90% of these lawsuits, a lot of lawyers, including myself, are very cautious in the cases that we take. We can't take as many lawsuits as we used to because some of them we simply can't win. The legal hurdles are so high now, you really need to prove recklessness, clear and convincing evidence of recklessness in order to win these cases. And so it takes a very specific type case for us to look at it and say to ourselves, this is one we can win. Because if we can't help the patient, what's the point?
Right. Let's take another caller. We've got Tom. Tom, good morning. Hi, Tom.
Hey, good morning, Nick. How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
I've got a question. My girlfriend just had neck surgery here a few months back, and they went in there and put a cadaver bone in her neck.
Okay.
Well, when they went in her neck, it had a hematose come up. Well, when they got in there, it was staph infection. And then she had to come home, be put on a PICC line and stuff. I've been having to take care of that. She's on antibiotics for probably a year. But this infection came from that cadaver bone. And I thought they were supposed to be sterile or something, you know, before they use them.
All right.
And
Okay.
Tom's raised a couple of issues.
All right.
First of all, she likely had a fusion or discectomy. The use of cadaver bone is common in these procedures. It's used to stabilize the area where the surgery occurs, whether it's in the lumbar or in the cervical area.
What do they do, by the way, with cadaver bone when they do take it? Meaning that's taken from another human, deceased.
Correct.
They take that. Do they sterilize it? What do they do?
Well, it is sterilized.
What do? They cut out the piece they need and.
Yes.
What do they do? Dip it in alcohol?
Well, I don't know in terms of dipping alcohol, but they do sterilize the cadaver bone. What I wanted to speak to Tom about, though, is Tom was like, well, why would she get infected, get staph, if the cadaver bone is supposed to be free of infection? It's the surgery itself.
Right.
We've talked about this many times. There's no guarantee during the surgery, Tom, that infection, staph, or some bug won't get into the body as a result of whether the instruments are being used, whether there is a part of the skin. Everybody's got staph on their skin. Right. Every day we live with it.
Right.
It's not meant to get inside the skin where the bloodstream is. And so there are many avenues that infection can get into the body. I'm not ruling out the cadaver. It could be a source as well, but there are other sources for it. The frustration here is, and I understand this from Tom's point, you're like, good grief, it's so hard to have to go through a surgery and then find out that I've got staph infection growing in me, and now I've got to go through treating the infection, perhaps having to have more surgery, because if there's hardware involved, there's a potential the hardware has to be removed, because once the infection gets to the hardware, you got to take it out.
Everything else. Jeez.
That's just one of the complications of surgery. I don't have a whole lot of tools in the toolbox for handling those type cases, because every doctor, all my experts are going to tell me the same thing. This is simply a risk of the procedure. You take that chance when you go into the knife. But I wonder sometimes if we really did a deep, thorough study of surgeries nowadays, whether healthcare providers are truly doing everything they're supposed to make sure they have a sterile field and making sure that patients don't get infected during surgery.
And as you've said in the past, and you're the first person I will call if I need surgery, you can look, and I think you're right. I think sometimes it's unavoidable, and it probably happens in every hospital in the country to a degree. But there's probably some hospitals where it is at a much higher rate than others. And that is not by happenstance, in my opinion. If it's much higher, it's because some hospitals do a better job keeping clean than others.
That's correct. And the other part of this is the lawsuits that I handle and most of my colleagues handle are not the cases where someone got infected during the surgery, because as I told you, that's a risk of the procedure. That's what our experts say. The lawsuits arise out of the failure to handle the infection or failure to diagnose it in a timely manner. In other words, you can treat it when it's a campfire and deal with it. When it becomes a forest fire, that's when there's serious problems. That's when you can have major injuries or death.
Yeah. You know, as we go to break, it just reminds me, and this was several years ago, and it's maybe worse now, but the fact that it happens. Remember Tom Brady, his knee got
Yes.
torn up, and he
Yes.
had surgery. This was years ago, probably 10 years ago. But he came out of it, and one reason he delayed coming back is he developed a staph infection in his knee. And trust me, Tom Brady had the best care any money can buy. And yet even he got an infection. It just shows it can happen. But it delayed his return to playing.
Yeah.
So listen, we'll take a break on that note. When we come back, more of our calls, more of our conversation with Clint Kelly right after this.
This is a Storm 5 weather update.